Hello everyone, this is CounterYolo, bringing you another video talking about Star Trek Online. And in today's video, I'm going to go over some budget beam tank builds inside the game. Now, because I'm going to go over all 6 energy types in this video, this is going to be very generalistic, but I will be going over all of them. I will also be including SDO Academy links for all 6 of the budget builds in the description. Going over these builds, I'll be defining first what exactly is a budget build for me in 2019. And then I'll go over my general selection of species, traits, and bridge officers. And then I'll go through a few elements and then eventually get to the consoles and weapons for beam tanks inside the game, for the budget end anyway. Feel free to see the time links in the description for everything. There will be a few more links in there than what will actually be in this list right here on this slide. So feel free to look in there for the various links. So first off, what exactly is a budget build? This is varied a lot across the community, and things like should we include C-store items, should we include items that are on the exchange but are really cheap, should we include for fleet equipment, because even though not everyone has access to all that stuff inside the game, should we include reputation items because, well, those do cost millions of EC to level up all of your reputations to tier 6 nowadays. Should we include stuff on the exchange if it's under the 15 million energy credit cap? Or should we go super extreme and only include stuff that's from missions? And if it's not missions, then we can't include it in our build at all. That is the most extreme. This is how I'm going to define it personally. I'm going to define it as things that you can get on your own. And in all this, I'm going to be saying that there's going to be no upgrading whatsoever in this. So this will include R&D weapons and consoles, reputation weapons and consoles, because all you have to do is just do random TFOs, worst case scenario, and you eventually get everything. This will also include mission weapons, consoles, and also mission traits, because those do exist. I will also be including any traits that are inherent with your captain and your profession, as well as any traits that you can earn through your specializations. I will be excluding all fleet items and all fleet weapons, and all fleet bridge officers. I'm going to be excluding all duty officers for simplicity's sake, just because otherwise it would get extremely complicated and nitty-gritty to figure out which ones are technically earnable and which ones you have to get off of lockbox stuff inside the game. For me, it's just simpler just to say we're not going to do any duty officers for these builds and just go on from there. I will also not be including any lockbox or low buy items inside the game or weapons, whatever. I will also not be including any traits from those things at all either. Basically, if it's from lockbox or from low buy, I will not be including it. I will also not be including any Starship items and weapons or any event items. This is simply because most of your Starship event stuff becomes fairly expensive after that event is over. Like, for instance, for our current event, if you don't get the Vicarious Restorer Warship during this event, it'll eventually go on to the Phoenix Lockbox stuff for an epic drop for one character, which takes a lot of dilithium on average to get that for a character. On average, it's honestly on par, if not more expensive than most of your tier 6 starships on the exchange. So it's pretty cost prohibitive if you don't already earn the starship from its previous run and event. There are some event items which I have said before that are technically a little bit easier to access because you can just, whenever the next event runs, you do the event for a couple days and you get the item. Definitely understandable for simplicity's sake. Again, I'm just going to be excluding that just so that I can basically say with whatever build that I'm showing off in here, that any captain starting at any point in time in the game can basically get everything in these builds no matter what. That's kind of the general rule that I'm going with, and I'm going to stick to it for this video. For the character and bridge officers, I decided I'm not going to specify to any faction, and I'm going to use what's most generalistic to most of the factions in the game, and that's going to be choosing an alien female captain, just because aliens have access to a lot more of the traits than a lot of other species. Females have access to more outfits than males, just the way it works in the game. The only two factions that technically don't have access to the alien race is TOS and Gemidar. Gemidar only has Gemidar and Gemidar Vanguard. TOS only has Human, Vulcan, Andorian, and Tellarite. So yeah, that's why I'm choosing Alien Female and just sticking with that in general. For bridge officers themselves, if you're a Romulan captain, you'll obviously be doing 5 SROs. A lot of them you'll probably just get naturally as you're getting your bridge officers. If not, you might be able to get them fairly cheap off of the exchange. Most of them on the exchange here on PC are less than 5,000 energy credits, which would mean on console, it shouldn't be that insanely inflated higher, honestly. These should still be fairly affordable because you can even have uncommon duty officers that are Romulans with SRO. So it's not really that insanely terrible. SRO stands for Superior Romulan Operative, by the way. They give you a lot of crit chance and crit severity in space. For Federation and Klingon Empire, the option that you'll be going for is choosing the Hierarchy Science Officer from a specific Delta Quadrant mission. Just scroll through them and you'll eventually find the mission that gives the Hierarchy Bridge Officer. And then from there, you'll either have 4 human bridge officers if you're Federation, or 4 Nautican bridge officers if you're Klingon Empire. Nauticans and Hierarchy Guy both have a pirate trait, which gives them additional damage in space. And the human bridge officers is the only normal Federation bridge officer that gives you anything in space, which is leadership, which gives you additional hull regen while you're in combat. It's not super much, but it is decently valuable for tanks inside the game. For starships, for this video and for my next budget tank video, I'll be using 2 ships that are accessible to everyone in the game. Technically, you do have to use the exchange. This is the one exception, and it's just simply because otherwise I'd have to use 3 different starships and talking about them for these 2 videos. For simplicity's sake, since I'm already going to be doing over 6 different energy types in this video, I thought I was just going to stick to just one ship that is decently cheap off the exchange. It only costs a couple million credits. That any player from any faction, any allegiance can use. Technically, the Tholian Orb Weaver is a little bit more expensive. From time to time, this is more expensive than 15 million on the exchange for PC, which means this might be always cost prohibitive on console. I'm not fully sure on that. I haven't played on console. I would look forward to being able to do that at some point in the future, but I just haven't gotten the chance. But anyway, for traits themselves, here's the ones that I suggest using if you don't care about your own profession stuff. Especially if you're going to be a science captain doing beams, this is kind of the way that I would recommend going. Bulkhead and Shield Technician gives you additional max hull and shield capacity, especially as a tank without a Tier 6 starship. You're going to need some of these extra stats to keep up with Tier 6 starships. There are 3 earnable traits in the game that I highly recommend: Redirected Armor Plating, Regenerative Control Synergy, and Point Blank Shot. Redirected Armor Plating gives you additional damage resistance rating whenever you're shot in an arc that's not your front. Regenerative Control Synergy gives you additional hull regen whenever you're using a control bridge officer ability, which, since we're going to be using Gravity Well in this build, this gives you hull regen whenever you use that ability. Point Blank Shot gives you additional bonus damage as you get closer to targets. Since we're tanks, we want to do as much damage as, well, not only do as much damage as possible, we're going to want to be as close as possible to our enemies when at all possible. This is going to be very valuable to us. Additionally, alongside that, Techie for additional hull regeneration and hull healing, Accurate and Elusive for additional accuracy and defense, and Beam Training and Beam Barrage for additional beam damage, because that's what we're going to be using. If you're a Tactical Captain is the one that it's almost like inherently that you almost have to pay to win in order to be on even terms or better than the other professions. A good day to die is almost necessary for them in order for them to have a lot of extra damage. Just that they're going on fighting can be spammed and be up 33% of the time for its bonus damage. And if you get this off of the exchange, Last Ditch Effort can make this a very good potent double combo for a tactical tank. However, you don't necessarily need this. It's very helpful to make a certain trait decently valuable for you, especially because if you're super good at the game, you're not going to be at low enough hull integrity to be able to go down fighting as a tank captain. However, especially since we're doing budget builds, engineers are the most friendly when it comes to budget builds. The two ones I highly recommend that you use if you're an engineer is Grace Under Fire and EPS Manifold Efficiency. Grace Under Fire allows your miraculous repairs, or miracle workers as used to be called in the game, to basically be up twice as often. Instead of having a 4-minute cooldown, it now has a 90-second cooldown. So it is really nice. EPS Manifold Efficiency, it gives you 10 subsystem power to everything every single time that you use emergency power to something. And since in most of my tank builds, I highly recommend emergency power to weapons and emergency power to shields for additional damage and additional resistance to your shields. Since you can have that going, since you can use those every 15 seconds, you'll end up with 20 additional subsystem power to all 4 of your subsystem power settings, which is very, very substantial. It's very substantial, especially at the budget end. For our Starship traits themselves, these are the 4 that I recommend personally. The best defense is the only one you can earn from a mission. Basically, your attack patterns become a hull healing buff. So basically, whenever you need to use a hull heal, just use one of your attack patterns on your ship right before you use the hull heal, and it is 25% more effective right off the bat. Whenever you get to medium and high end, especially if you have a lot of other traits available to you, you're not going to see this trait at all in a lot of builds, but especially at the budget end, it is very valuable. Especially for tanks, it actually makes your attack patterns actually useful for you. A slightly better one that's earnable is going the extra mile. At the improved version, it's an additional 15% instead of 10%, but basically this is just a passive buff to your shield and hull healing, and if you use a hull or shield heal when you're at or above 90% hull, then you get an additional 10% max HP for 20 seconds. This was changed with the History Will Remember trait. Before that trait came into the game, this was just temporary HP. With the addition of that trait, this is now actual max HP, which is very nice because max HP adds the damage resistance rating of your starship to those hit points instead of just being extra hit points that immediately get soaked up and go away. This is a very, very, very nice budget and tank trait. The other 2 good ones that are going to take a while for you to get if you do my recommendations for specializations is going to be Pedal to the Metal and Unconventional Tactics, because this one you have to invest in the pilot specialization, and this one you have to invest in the strategist specialization, which are ones that are exclusive to space, which since I like to use specializations that are good in space and ground, they're not ones that I would recommend to highly invest in unless you only care about space. Improved Pedal to the Metal gives you a potential 1 to 10% additional damage, or 2 to 20% additional bonus damage if you have the improved version and full 30 points invested in the pilot specialization. And since in these builds you're going to be a tank and full throttle the whole time anyway, it's just an additional bonus damage that's constantly on the whole time. It is pretty nice. Unconventional Tactics gives you a situational additional bonus all damage whenever you use Brace for Impact. So basically, Brace for Impact, if you don't ever really need it, you can use them whenever you want to get an additional damage buff. Sometimes you might need it, sometimes you might not. For our traits themselves, because I'm assuming you're not going to be using a tier 6 starship, we need a lot of additional defensive stuff for our starship. Because we have no duty officers, we need this for additional bridge officer building recharge speed. We also need additional hull capacity from ox power defense and fortified hull, just so that our hull capacity can be somewhat similar, but still it's going to be lower than a lot of our tier 6 starships inside the game. Additionally, outside of that, Antiproton our conduits allows us to have a lot of good hull and shield regen whenever we're critically hit, which since we're tanking, that's going to happen quite a bit still. Then there's a couple of active reputation stuff, which I've talked about before. You easily replace Refracting Tetryon Cascade with the Romulan Cloak from the Romulan rep. Just because you might need some additional defensive stuff, especially because in this build we're not going to have a lot of clickies that are going to keep us alive. When it comes to our stuff themselves, as I said, no duty officers. Specializations is going to be Merc Worker Primary, and then secondary for command if you are an engineer or a tactical captain, and you'll use Temporal Operative as secondary if you are a science captain, just because that is just so much stronger on you. For our space set themselves, I've stuck to just ones from missions. There are some ones from reputations that can situationally be stronger at the budget end. The 4-piece and 3-piece Lucari set is just not as strong as the Cavalli stuff at the budget end. You do need at least Ultra Rare Mark 15 for the Lucari stuff to start beating out the Cavalli stuff, honestly. Just kind of the way it is inside the game. The Cavalli 3-piece set, the Deflector, Impulse Engines, and Regenerate Shield is from the Dust to Dust mission. The Warp Core that I recommend, if you don't use a different Warp Core, is the Preeminent Warp Core, just because it does stuff that's similar to the Cavalli Warp Core, except instead of restoring your shields, it gives you a lot of additional shield resistance to yourself, which is still pretty nice. So here's the raw stats of the Voth Bastion Flight Deck Cruiser. The stats of the hull is probably a little bit off. The STO Wiki and also the game itself has some wonky, weird things on how they adjust the hull ratios. Take this with a grain of salt, but just remember that the hull is still good, and it has a decent shield ratio as well, especially for a T5U ship. As I said before on this channel, in my opinion, this is the strongest T5U cruiser available to tanks inside the game right now. For the bridge after seating, it's still decent. If this was a tier 6 ship, it would be a Lieutenant Commander Tactical instead of a Lieutenant Tactical, but other than that, it's just fine. With 5 engineering consoles, 3 science, and 3 tactical, with 1 hangar bay and defensive cruiser commands, which means it only has the shield frequency modulation and command attract fire as its 2 cruiser commands. My recommendation for the bridge after seats, I was too lazy to do a slide for this, I'm just copying it from my STO Academy builds, is to make this lieutenant slot another tactical and this engineering slot another engineering slot, just so that we can have 2 emergency powers here with Ox Structural Integrity Field as our commander slot here. Unfortunately, with this type of build, it is necessary to have it. I normally don't put these in here because I don't like this ability at all, but in this build, and without a lot of better traits, it is something that we actually need. For our tactical seats themselves, I have Tactical Team, Attack Pattern Delta for the trait, otherwise I wouldn't put this at all inside the build at all, along with a Torpedo Spread and a Beamfire Will. With our Romulan build, the Plasma build that I have, I don't use Torpedo Spread because I don't have any torpedoes on the Plasma build for proccing Torpedo Spread. So for that particular build, it's just a Beamfire Will and another Tactical Team. Other than that, this build is going to be the same for all 6 of the energy types that I'm going to be using for this build. As for budget consoles themselves, this is my high recommendation for budget and stuff for engineering. As you can see here, 4 of the consoles are actually engineering consoles. However, only 1 of them has damage resistance rating on it, and that's the Trillium Deplating. Because not only do you get damage resistance rating, but you get some additional hull capacity, shield capacity, and also a lot of your Ox power will also be added to your shields as bonus power as well. Especially because most people in the game will do weapons as their primary power and auxiliary as their secondary power. This will add a very high substantial amount of Ox power to your shield power as well. This is a very, very well-rounded, very good defensive engineering console. Alongside this one, which is from the Ragnar mission, there's 2 other consoles that are for missions, Reinforced Armaments and House Martok Defensive Configuration. Reinforced Armaments give us additional power transfer rate, which basically transfers into more DPS, along with additional hull healing and additional maximum hull capacity anyway. House Martok gives us a lot of just straight stats, which is really nice. From Beyond the Nexus, Reinforced Armaments, and from the Brushfire mission for the House Martok Defensive Configuration. We also have 2 that aren't from missions. The Conductive RCS Accelerator is from crafting, from R&D 15 Engineering. We don't actually need this to be any higher because the big thing we're using this console for is the shield resistance. Basically, as long as you're healing every 15 seconds, which that's what Ox Structural Integrity Field is going to be doing for us, it's basically making sure that we have an additional 10% shield resistance up 50% of the time, which is going to be very substantial for this build. Additionally, we have for our fifth engineering slot, we have a simulated module, which gives us a lot of general stats, which can be very useful for our build. However, if you need even more defensive stuff than what these 4 consoles themselves can provide, I have 2 other options for you. There is Neutronium Alloy, if you need more damage resistance rating. For tanks, you are, in my opinion, you are allowed to have a second damage resistance rating console on your ship, especially if you really need it. If it's not just damage resistance, if you just need just extra healing in general, my recommendation is Sif Generator. They are both craftable from your R&D engineering, and just getting the general stuff at Mark 12 will be able to get you this. When it comes to your tactical and science consoles, my recommendation at budget end is just to focus on consoles that add damage to your ship for whatever energy type that you're looking for. For tactical, just the straight ones, they'll just do that. For your science consoles, my recommendation is to use Sustained Radiant Field, because it gives you damage plus it adds additional hull and shield healing. Especially at the budget end, there's a good chance you're probably going to need to heal your allies at some point, and this will add a lot of additional bonus healing to your allies whenever you need to. It's not much, but at least it'll do more. Depending upon your energy type, you'll have a couple of other universal or science consoles that will add a lot more damage to the energy type that you're using. And you'll see those as we get into those specific builds themselves. Before we get into those, though, we have to talk about weapons for beginners, and especially at the budget end. Basically, we're talking about weapon power cost here, and I'm not going to go into the specifics in math because already this is going to be a very long video, and a lot of other YouTube viewers have already talked about this, and a lot of other websites talk about Star Trek Online over the previous couple of years have already talked about this too. If you're curious about that, seriously, just put this into a search bar in whatever search engine that you prefer. You'll be able to find several people talking about this. In general, though, if you use 6 energy weapons or 7 beam energy weapons, it's going to do basically the same amount of DPS. If you use 8, it's actually going to do less DPS than 6 or 7. The exception here is if you have 2 or more power cost reduction sources on your starship, so that power that you're using for having more weapons is countered, basically. The only reason why you use more weapons if you aren't using power cost reduction sources is if you really value those extra procs of whatever weapon that you're chaining on your starship to actually occur. Like, for instance, if you want to use a lot of piezo Polaron beam arrays, those procs are very valuable, so having a bunch of them on your ship can be situationally okay still. In my opinion, for budget end, just stick with trying to use 6 beam weapons. If you want to use 7, that's okay, but don't use more than 7 unless you have 2 or more power cost reduction sources on your ship. My suggestion, and what you'll see in my builds, is going to be 1 torpedo in the front and 1 torpedo or mine in the back. And ideally, you're going to be using torpedoes that are from sets that will be enhancing the beam weapon type that you're going to be using. Energy torpedoes are enhanced even further than regular torpedoes, and I'll talk about that more in depth as we get into the specific energy types themselves. In terms of budget and power cost reduction, there's 3 general sources. There is weapon system efficiency, which is a cruiser command on typical cruisers and typical battle cruisers. Unfortunately, tanks really need to opt into command extract fire, or at least that's what's highly suggested. In a week or two, I'll be talking about a different method to tank that doesn't deal with threat generation. It's an interesting and weird video. But yeah, basically for tanks, you don't have this option. Everyone else has this option, and it's really awesome if they happen to use a cruiser with this stuff for them. Our next option is the deuterium warp core, or Thoron singularity core for Romulan captains. It also gives you weapon power cost reduction. There are 2 different fleet versions that also give you weapon power cost reduction that are better. They're both better in their own ways. Unfortunately, in this video, we're not using any fleet weapons, consoles, or devices at all. So yeah, we can't use those. This is the only option for this video. Our third option is the morphogenic tactical console from the home mission. This is a tactical console for Polaron. It does give you weapon power cost as well. This is only really ideal for Polaron builds in general. If you're not using Polaron builds, you shouldn't really be sacrificing a tactical console just for some weapon power cost reduction, unless you really, really value that highly. All other sources inside the game are either off of your fleet, from the C-store, from the exchange, or from various other events or earnable ships inside the game. These are the only ones that any player at any time can have access to. So it's very, very limiting, which is why my general rule of thumb, as I'm going through this video, is 6 or 7 beam weapons, and that's it. Basically, every build is going to have at least 1 torpedo. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. So obviously, in my opinion, the best one for tanking is going to be Polaron. You have so many good options available to you, plus you have 2 torpedoes that you can use that enhances your damage further too. Obviously, the Kari Reputation 2-piece is obviously the must-have to start off with. The Piezo Polaron Beam Array has double the proc chance of neural Piezo Polarons, has higher damage because of it being a set weapon, plus it's 2-piece with a universal console that's already basically a tactical console in terms of damage. Its set bonus gives you even more Polaron damage, so it is really, really nice. Also, any of your weapon slots you have left, just slot in more Piezo Polaron Beam Arrays, and it's going to enhance the survivability of your ship even further than it's already going to be in this build. Additionally, alongside that, if you use the Morphogenic 3-piece from the home mission, you have weapon power cost reduction with the tactical console, fireable cooldowns off of the 2-piece, and then the 3-piece, well, you get some additional crit chance or crit severity. I can't remember the exact stats anymore. But you get some additional crit chance and crit severity based upon fire and beam, fire will, and like cannon scatter volley. Unfortunately, in this particular build with this particular starship, we can't actually slot cannon scatter volley without significantly sacrificing durability, so we can't do that. So I just have beam, fire will with this ship. The torpedo that you get with this mission, though, is an energy torpedo, which means that this torpedo is going to be enhanced significantly by your Polaron damage consoles. So like this one, and your other real tactical consoles themselves, which is pretty substantial and really nice. Which is why this one's going to be our torpedo that's going to go in the front. For our torpedo that's going to go into the rear, we're actually going to be using the Gamma Reputation 2-piece. This is a wide arc torpedo, which has a good chance to slow enemies whenever it hits enemies. It's a wide arc torpedo, so it's a wider firing arc, and the 2-piece with this universal console from the set gives you additional damage, which the 2-piece damage plus the damage off of this console gives you damage very, very close to what a regular tactical console would actually give you. So basically, for Polaron, you between everything, you basically have about 5 tactical consoles worth of damage, even if you only have 3 tactical consoles on your starship. It's very powerful, even in a budget build setting. Additionally, with Tier 6 Reputation, we're able to get an extra beam that really puts Polaron over the edge. The Temporal Reputation set beam has a really cool proc that gives you additional shield resistance, and it can stack multiple times, and each stack can last up to a minute. Of course, the proc is a regular proc chance, so it might not be super great, but it's still technically there. You could also do it the 2-piece with its console for additional directed energy damage, but it might be better just to use another universal console that gives you some more crit chance or crit severity instead of this guy personally with the amount of damage that you're getting off of the Polaron in the first place. So yeah, so my recommendation for this build. So your front weapons are going to look like the advanced Piezo Polaron with morphogenic torpedo, temporal rep beam, and 1 Piezo Polaron beam array. And then your back's going to have the morphogenic energy weapon, the gamma rep torpedo, and then 2 more Piezo Polaron beam arrays. That's what the ship looks like. Alright, so let's go ahead and go over to our Disruptor build now. It's the other really, really good one for budget end. It's also one of the highest performing DPS energy types inside the game too. So to get started, obviously we're going to have the Terran Task Force Beam Array because it has the highest DPS inside the game. Also, it just so happens that this reputation has, for most cases, the best proc for tanking with Withering Disruptors, and it's also accessible to everyone, so it is really nice. You're not really going to have that many slots left for Withering Disruptors, but you feel free to slot those for whatever slots you happen to have left. Obviously, alongside that, you want the Noskin 3-piece from the Echoes of Light mission. This is an extremely good set. You have an energy torpedo just like the morphogenic torpedo. This torpedo's damage is increased by having more consoles that enhance disruptor damage, so that's really nice. The science console enhances disruptor damage as well, and then the 3-piece with the beam has a 3-piece bonus of enhancing disruptor damage even further too. So there's really no loss to using all 3 pieces of this set entirely. Additionally, with the new Romulus reputation, the experimental weapon was given a disruptor variant at tier 6 reputation, which means that this entire 3-piece is now usable for this build as well. This torpedo we're going to put in the back, but really the big value comes from the 2-piece with the beam and the universal console, which was already pretty good and used by a lot of DPS captains anyway inside the game. The 2-piece gives you more disruptor damage. The 3-piece gives you an extra clicky, which gives you decent damage off of this weapon itself. Lastly, for our universal, not used for universal, our Omni beam is the House Martok beam. As I said before, we're already using this console anyway, so for all of these builds, so just adding this thing on it, basically this weapon will basically add additional crit and accuracy to our build. Alright, so now for our next option, we are going to go to phasers. It's a little bit smidget down from disruptors and polarons. The way that I personally see phasers in the game right now is at the budget and mid-level. It's kind of like a mix and blend between Polaron and Disruptor. You do a lot of damage, but you have a decent amount of survival alongside that too. Obviously, for first off, we're going to use the Terran Rep Beam Array. It's the highest one in the game, and for your remaining stuff, go to the Undean reputation. The biomolecular beams are pretty good. Of course, you could also just use regular phasers, and they will do the job too. Alongside that, you'll want to use the Quantum 3-piece from the Sunrise mission. The set gives you additional accuracy. It substantially increases the drain procs of both the energy quantum and the quantum torpedo. And the 3-piece gives you a drain clicky as well to give yourself additional power, which at the budget end is very valuable. You want to put this torpedo in the front. The gamma rep stuff here also impacts phasers as well as polarons, so we'll obviously want to use this 2-piece. You won't have to wait until tier 6 rep to use this because the bonuses to phaser is already innately added to this console itself. And since it isn't really enhanced by this stuff, it doesn't really matter too much. Just use them both, put this on the back, and you get a tactical console a universal console really similar to tactical consoles too. And then lastly, we'll use the Trilithium Omni Beam for additional firing cycle haste, which is pretty nice. Because we're already using this engineering console on our Starship anyway. Alright, so alongside that, we have Antiproton. It's kind of hard for me whether to judge whether to put Antiproton here or whether to put Plasma here. I decided that at the extreme budget end, Antiproton was slightly better, but not by much. The reason really is because of the temporal temporal initiative reputation. The temporal beams have an extremely good proc, as I talked about a little bit in the Polaron section. The set one gives you honestly the best Antiproton defensive option, and you can honestly just fill the rest of yours with this if you really want it. And that's what I kind of recommend anyway. Because basically outside of that, you're just going to have a torpedo in the front and the back, and then the ancient omnidirectional beam array from gosh, I can't remember the mission anymore that this comes from. But it's from one of the earlier missions in the Sphere arc. It might even be the very first one that this Omni Beam and this Warp Core comes from. It also means that Antiproton doesn't use the regular Warp Core that I recommend for most of my builds. Antiproton uses its own unique Warp Core. Yeah, so in the front with this, you'll use the Iconian torpedo. In the back, you'll use the temporal rep torpedo, just because this one has such a long cooldown that this one's just going to be better overall for you. If you look at this build in the description, you'll see that that's basically what this build is pretty much dominated by. Unfortunately, as well with Antiproton as well as Tetryon, most of the really good universal consoles that enhance these energy types are only available from like event stuff, so like through like Phoenix Lockbox or through Lockbox and low-buy stuff. So it's really hard to really enhance these really substantially without those types of items on our starship. But all right, let's go ahead and get over to Plasma now. This was really difficult to put so low on this list just because at the high end, Plasma is the best energy type for threat generation. Like there is just no contest. Now yes, Phaser and Disruptor do the best damage. Plasma is the best for threat generation. If Plasma is even close to what Phaser and Disruptor is doing, Plasma is going to get the threat. And enemies are going to be targeting the Plasma player instead of the Disruptor or the Phaser player. It's just the way it is inside the game. Really, the reason why this is lower, as you can see here in the text, at the budget end, there is no option to get a Plasma torpedo with torpedo spread. And there's no reputation set that enhances really the Plasma stuff in any way that can be enhanced with torpedo spread. We have the regular Romulan Plasma stuff from the new Romulus rep, but it can't be enhanced by torpedo spread, so it's really low. Alongside that, Plasma doesn't have a set omnidirectional Plasma weapon. Honestly, all Cryptic would have to do to make this like super really high on my list is just add a mission with a new Plasma set that gave us a set omnidirectional Plasma, a torpedo that can use torpedo spread, and then a console with it. And I would be super happy. A lot of people complaining on the forums for a while about Plasma would be super happy, and all those complaints would just stop. But anyway, the two big sets here that you'll want to use for Plasma is the Lucari reputation stuff. At tier 6 for reputation, the Piezo weapon is able to have a Plasma variant, which is really substantial. Especially for a broadsiding Plasma build, you want to use the beam. If you're going to be doing a cannon build, you want to use the dual heavy cannon. I'm actually working on making a cannon Plasma build right now. But because of doing videos for you all, I haven't been able to play STO super much lately, so I haven't been able to level up things accordingly to be able to get that to you all soon. But I am working on it. So that's super nice, and I've talked about that previously in the Polaron build. Alongside that, the new Romulus 3-piece is extremely nice as well. This is the one torpedo that we're actually going to be using, and that's what we're going to be putting in the front. It's the same thing as what I use for Disruptors. We have a beam array, we have this thing, which the 2-piece gives us more Plasma damage, and then 3-piece gives us an extra Plasma clicky, which is pretty substantial for DPS at the budget end. Once you get higher up, it's not as useful, but it's still nice. And then I have a crafted Omni Plasma just because I like to have an Omni beam array on my builds, and this is the only one that doesn't have a mission version to be able to put on my ship. Our last one is Tetryon. Oh, Tetryon. Oh, this is probably the one that is the most neglected inside the whole game right now. With the various amount of Tetryon sets in the game, from the low-buy store, from Reputation, Star Trek Online really wants you to do a 5-3 dual beam bank build for this energy type. which is not ideal at all for tanks. So most of the reputation sets I can't really use. Alongside that, most of the sets that have Tetryon damage enhancement has extremely ridiculously low DPS enhancements for its set. If those sets really need buffs if they want us to use Tetryon, which unfortunately right now, because they're focusing on like Age of Discovery with Discovery Timeline stuff, it's not likely in the near future that they're going to add new Tetryon stuff to the game. It's just realistically the way that it is. So yes, we just kind of deal with what we have. The thing is though, like it's basically the worst energy type in the game in my opinion for budget end. Alongside that, it only goes to okay once you get to mid and high end. Just because if you happen to get the diffusive Tetryon low buy store like 2-piece or 3-piece, it's a very strong set. And if you use a lot of diffusive Tetryon weapons, it's very strong for tanking, but there's still not a lot of still not a lot of great ways to enhance your Tetryon damage without, exchange stuff still. So it's one of the unfortunate things about Tetryon. Diffused Tetryon is the only really great one. Refracting Tetryon from the Nucara rep is the other good option. So in the actual link below, you're going to see almost all the weapons be refracting Tetryon, just because that's the best we've really got right now. I have the Iconian 3-piece just because the only reputation beam array that Tetryon gets to have is the Iconian one. That's it. All the other ones are dual beam banks or turrets. Thank you, Cryptic. Unfortunately, you do have the Butterfly mission, which gives you a 2 or 3-piece for extra Tetryon damage with a Omnium and Warp Core, kind of like the Antiproton stuff was. And I'm actually in the link below because there's so little ways to improve Tetryon damage in the free to play in like this particular version. I actually have a different 3-piece deflector, engines, and shields, just so that there's a bit more substantive Tetryon damage to the ship. But it is really, really, really hard. So I don't recommend doing Tetryon. You can if you want a challenge though, but that is up to you. All right, so for my TLDW, for a couple of the important things, this won't be everything, but for a couple of the important things, until you understand the game and get a lot of really good stuff in the game, which some of the stuff does cost a bit of in-game money to get. First off, if you're going to be a tank, highly consider my engineering consoles that I suggested earlier on in this video. There are a lot of good options in there, unless you get stronger clicky survival consoles from non-budget sources. Those ones are going to probably be your best bet, honestly. Additionally, alongside that, only use 6 to 7 energy weapons at the budget end. You need a lot of power cost reduction to use 8 energy weapons on your ship, or it's just going to be hurting you in the DPS and threat realm inside the game. Also, just as a little FYI, for all the builds in the description, they are designed for casual PvE, not for PvP, and they are designed for normal difficulty. You need to upgrade the gear to Mark 15 for a lot of the advanced TFOs inside the game. And yes, these builds work in the advanced TFOs inside the game. Tetryon is the only one that really struggles because it doesn't have a lot of great damage options available to you, but the other ones work just fine. And even though they technically work, a lot of your DPS players are going to say that your build sucks, and that's okay. Because guess what? If you're actually doing the build this way, you can say, guess what? I'm not using any of this, and this. So it still works as an okay tank. The problem why a lot of your DPS guys aren't going to like this type of build at all is simply because they'd be like, well, come on, you need this trait and this trait and this trait. I'm like, well, if you're needing those traits, you probably should be looking towards the elite missions inside the game, which, because there's not a lot of great rewards for elite missions and elite difficulty, a lot of those people are switching over to the advanced TFOs whenever they need to run for marks. And then they complain that their allies aren't doing a lot. Anyway, I'll probably talk about that in a different video discussion entirely, but I'm just going to table that for now. Anyway, thank you all for watching this decently long video today. Hopefully these budget builds gave you some ideas. I know obviously once you get to mid and high end, you'll want to get rid of having 2 torpedoes on your ship. You'll probably just want 1 in your front, and that's if it's an energy torpedo or if it's part of a specific set that you really like on your ship. But anyway, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for subscribing and for giving me a lot of support on the stuff that I've been putting up on YouTube anyway. Thank you all for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.